They say blood is thicker than water, but no one tells you what happens when that blood runs cold. My name is Evelyn, and the night my family slammed the door in my face while my son was dying taught me that some doors are meant to stay closed forever. It was 3 in the morning when everything changed. I was living in the basement of my parents' house in Oak Creek, a wealthy Texas suburb where luxury cars and perfect facades were the norm. The room they'd given Leo and me was barely bigger than a closet, tucked beside the water heater. They said it was temporary, just until I got back on my feet after Leo's father left. That was 2 years ago. I jolted awake to Leo whimpering. At first, I thought it was another bad dream, but when I reached over, his skin felt like fire. His little body was convulsing, eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. Foam formed at the corners of his mouth, and his limbs jerked in ways that made my heart stop. I scooped him up, his body rigid and burning hot, and my maternal instinct kicked into overdrive. I ran up the basement stairs, taking them 2 at a time, nearly tripping in my panic. Leo made terrible gurgling sounds, his heart racing against my chest like a trapped bird. When I reached the 2nd floor, where my parents' bedroom was, I started pounding on their door with my free hand while cradling Leo. "Mom, Dad, please, Leo can't breathe. He's having a seizure." I heard movement. Then my mother Carol cracked the door open. The hallway light illuminated her face, and what I saw still haunts me. It wasn't concern or alarm. It was pure, undisguised irritation at being woken up. She looked at me like I was a stray dog on her porch. "Evelyn," she hissed, voice sharp and cold. "Do you have any idea what time it is? Tiffany has the Texas teen pageant finals tomorrow. She needs her beauty sleep. She absolutely cannot have dark circles under her eyes." I felt slapped. My son was seizing in my arms, possibly dying, and she worried about my younger sister's appearance for a beauty pageant. "Mom, please, you don't understand. This is life or death. I need help. I need the car keys. We have to get him to the hospital right now." Before she could respond, Tiffany appeared behind her in an expensive silk pajama set. She was 18, golden and beautiful, the family princess. She looked at Leo with disgust, her perfect nose wrinkling. "Oh my God, this is so dramatic. You're acting like he's the only kid who's ever had a fever, and keep him away from me. I don't want to catch whatever germs he has." My father Richard emerged then, a large imposing man who'd built wealth through real estate and investment consulting. He looked at me standing there in my thin nightgown, barefoot, with Leo convulsing in my arms, and his expression was completely blank. "This isn't our problem," he said flatly. "You need to handle your own issues, Evelyn. You're an adult." I tried once more, voice breaking. "Dad, please. He's your grandson. He's just a baby. Please just let me use the car. I'll bring it right back. I promise." He didn't answer. Instead, he placed his hand on my shoulder and pushed. Hard. I stumbled backward, nearly losing my balance with Leo in my arms. I caught myself against the wall. The door slammed in my face, and I heard the lock click with a sound that echoed through my entire body. I stood there in the hallway, staring at that closed door. Leo was still seizing, his little body trembling against mine. In that moment, something inside me broke. Or maybe it finally woke up. I realized I was alone. I had always been alone in this house, but I'd been too desperate for their approval to see it. I ran out the front door into the freezing Texas night. The cold hit like a physical blow. I wore nothing but a thin cotton nightgown, and my feet were bare. Leo was dressed only in his little pajamas, but I didn't have time to think about that. Every second counted. The houses in Oak Creek sat far apart, each on at least an acre of manicured lawn. The nearest house was a quarter-mile away, and I knew the neighbors wouldn't help. They were cut from the same cloth as my parents, more concerned with property values than human decency. I ran toward the highway that bordered our neighborhood. My feet were already bleeding from the rough pavement, and the cold made my whole body shake. Or maybe that was adrenaline. Leo's seizure was subsiding, but he'd gone limp in my arms, and that terrified me more. I couldn't tell if he was breathing properly. The highway was mostly empty. I tried waving down cars. A Mercedes SUV slowed. The window cracked slightly, but when the woman inside saw me barefoot in a nightgown with a child, she quickly rolled it back up and sped away. A BMW did the same, then a Tesla. They looked at me like I was crazy, or dangerous, or both. I started crying then, great heaving sobs that made it hard to breathe. My feet were numb. Leo was so still in my arms, too still. I kept checking to make sure his chest was moving. Then, like a miracle, an old Ford F-150 pickup truck pulled over. The truck was covered in dust and looked held together more by rust and prayer than anything else. The driver climbed out, a man in his 60s with weathered skin, kind eyes, wearing work boots and a flannel shirt. He took one look at me and Leo and didn't ask a single question. "Get in the truck, ma'am," he said, urgent but calm. "Hospital's 15 minutes away if I push it." His name was Gus, and he drove like a man possessed. He ran red lights and stop signs, his old truck rattling and groaning. He kept glancing over at Leo with genuine concern. This stranger cared more about my son than my own family had. "What happened?" he asked, gripping the steering wheel. Seizure, I managed through tears. High fever. Started about 20 minutes ago. We'll make it, he said firmly. Just hang on. The emergency room at County General was bright and chaotic. Gus carried Leo inside because my legs had given out. Nurses and doctors swarmed immediately. They whisked Leo away on a gurney, and I tried to follow, but a nurse gently held me back. Let them work, she said. You did the right thing getting him here. Now let us take care of him. I collapsed into a plastic chair. My feet left bloody footprints on the linoleum. A different nurse brought me a blanket and hospital socks and cleaned and bandaged my feet without comment. Gus sat next to me and didn't leave until the doctor came out 2 hours later. Your son is stable, the doctor said. He was young, with tired eyes. We've got his fever down and the seizures have stopped. But I need to be honest with you, if you had waited even 15 more minutes, we might be having a very different conversation right now. Those words carved themselves into my brain. 15 minutes. That's how close I'd come to losing Leo because my family couldn't be bothered to help. I spent the rest of the night in a chair next to Leo's hospital bed, watching the rise and fall of his small chest, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor. When he finally opened his eyes at sunrise and gave me a weak smile, I cried tears of relief and rage. The hospital social worker came by in the morning. She asked careful questions about our living situation, and I could see concern in her eyes when I explained about the basement room, having no access to a car, being dependent on my parents for everything. She gave me a card for a women's shelter and a list of resources for single mothers. Gus had stayed the whole night, dozing in the waiting room. When I came out to tell him Leo was going to be okay, he smiled and patted my shoulder. You take care of that boy? He said. And you take care of yourself too. You're stronger than you know. He left me his phone number and told me to call if I ever needed anything. I watched him walk away, this guardian angel in the form of an old man with a rusty truck, and I realized that kindness existed in the world. It just didn't exist in my family. When the hospital discharged Leo that afternoon, I called a taxi with the last bit of money in my checking account. I dreaded going back to that house, but I had nowhere else to go, not yet. I walked through the front door with Leo in my arms. The house was full of activity, but not the kind you'd expect after a family emergency. My mother was on the phone discussing evening gown designers. My father was in his study talking about quarterly returns. Tiffany was in the living room with her pageant coach, practicing her walk and smile. None of them looked up when I entered. It was like we didn't exist. Like the entire night had never happened. I carried Leo down to the basement and laid him on our bed. He was still weak, still recovering, but he was alive. That was all that mattered. I sat on the edge of the bed and just looked at him for a long time. My beautiful boy, my entire world. Then I went back upstairs. My mother glanced up and saw me standing there. For a moment I thought she might ask about Leo. But what she said instead killed something inside me permanently. You really disrupted the entire household last night, she said coldly. I hope this little drama of yours doesn't affect Tiffany's performance tonight. She's already stressed enough without your chaos. My son almost died, and she called it chaos. She called it drama. I stood there in the doorway, and for the first time in my life, I really looked at my family. Not with the desperate eyes of a daughter seeking love, but with the clear vision of someone who'd just been shown the truth. They were strangers. Worse than strangers. Strangers might have helped. I turned and walked back to the basement without a word. Something had shifted inside me during that long night. The fear was still there. The desperation. The feeling of being trapped. But underneath it all, something new was growing. Something cold and calculated and patient. I sat down beside Leo and pulled out my phone. I started researching. Tenant rights in Texas. Resources for single mothers, job listings, apartment listings, anything that could give me a path out. But I also started looking at something else. I started looking at Tiffany's social media presence. My sister had thousands of Instagram followers. She'd positioned herself as this perfect, virtuous, kind-hearted pageant queen. Her posts were full of inspirational quotes about inner beauty and treating everyone with kindness. It was all a carefully constructed facade, and I'd spent years watching her build it. But I'd also spent years listening to what she said when the cameras were off. I'd heard her mock other contestants, calling them trailer trash. I'd watched her treat service workers like they were beneath her. I'd seen her throw tantrums, breaking expensive things and blaming others. The real Tiffany was nothing like the Instagram version. Over the next few days, I started documenting everything. I kept my phone recording during family dinners, capturing Tiffany's cruel comments. I recorded her conversation with her pageant coach where she laughed about sabotaging another girl's costume. I took screenshots of her private messages where she made racist remarks about one of the judges. I wasn't sure yet what I'd do with this information. I just knew I needed ammunition, and in my family, reputation was everything. They'd built their entire lives around appearances, around being seen as successful and refined. That carefully maintained image was their armor, and I was going to find every crack in it. At night, after Leo fell asleep, I would lie awake planning. the old Evelyn would have felt guilty. The old Evelyn would have talked herself out of it, telling herself that family was sacred, that revenge was beneath her. But the old Evelyn had died in that hallway when the door slammed shut. I started going to the public library during the day while Leo was at daycare. I used the library computers to create anonymous email accounts. I researched the local media landscape, figuring out which bloggers and journalists covered the pageant circuit, and I realized something important. Tiffany wasn't just my parents' favorite child. She was their investment. My father's consulting business relied heavily on social connections and networking. Having a successful pageant queen daughter opened doors for him. My mother's entire identity was wrapped up in being Tiffany's mother. They'd put all their eggs in one perfectly coiffed basket, which meant that if Tiffany fell, they would fall too. The pageant was 2 weeks away. The Texas teen pageant was televised locally and attended by sponsors and scouts from bigger national competitions. Tiffany was the favorite to win. Everything in our household revolved around this event. I needed help though. I couldn't do this alone, and I knew exactly who to approach. Maria Rodriguez was Tiffany's biggest competitor. She was talented, beautiful, and had worked incredibly hard to get where she was. She also had personal reason to dislike my sister. At a competition 6 months earlier, Tiffany had deliberately spilled red wine on Maria's white gown minutes before she was supposed to go on stage. Maria had to compete in a backup dress that didn't fit properly, and she lost. I'd seen Tiffany do it, and when I confronted her afterward, she'd just laughed. I found Maria's contact information through her public Instagram. I sent her a direct message. "I have information about Tiffany that you'll want to see. Can we meet?" She responded within an hour. "Who is this?" "Someone who wants to see her lose as much as you do." We met at a coffee shop in a different town. Maria was more beautiful in person than in photos, with long dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. When I sat down, she studied me carefully. "You're her sister," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Why would you want to help me?" I didn't cry. I didn't explain about Leo, or the hospital, or the closed door. I simply said, "Because she needs to lose, and my family needs to understand that actions have consequences." I slid my phone across the table and played one of the recordings. It was Tiffany talking to her pageant coach, laughing about Maria, calling her a wetback and saying, "Mexican girls shouldn't be allowed to compete in American pageants." Maria's face went very still, but I could see the anger building behind her eyes. "I have hours of this," I said quietly. "Audio, video, screenshots. She's been building this perfect public image, but it's all fake, and I think the world deserves to know who she really is." Maria looked at me for a long moment, then she smiled, and it was a smile I recognized. The smile of someone who'd been hurt and humiliated and was ready to fight back. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "I need this to come from someone other than me. If I'm the source, my family will just dismiss it as jealousy or mental instability. But if it comes from multiple sources, if it becomes a scandal they can't control, that's different." Maria nodded slowly. "I know a blogger, Jessica Chen. She runs a pageant expose site called Crown and Controversy. She's been trying to get dirt on Tiffany for years, but she's never had proof. She'll have proof now." Over the next week, Maria and I met several times. We compiled everything into a comprehensive package: audio clips, video segments, screenshots of text messages, and social media posts. We organized it chronologically, showing a pattern of behavior. We made it impossible to deny or dismiss. Jessica Chen was thrilled when Maria approached her. She verified all the evidence, checked the metadata to ensure nothing had been doctored, and confirmed the voices and faces. Then she started planning her release strategy. The Texas Teen Pageant Final was on a Saturday night, held at the Grand Theater downtown with an audience of over 1,000 people and a live stream. Tiffany had been practicing for months. My parents had spent a fortune on her dress, coaching, and hair and makeup team. I spent that afternoon getting Leo ready. I dressed myself carefully too, in the only decent outfit I owned. I wasn't planning to attend the pageant. I had something else in mind. Jessica's blog post was scheduled to go live at exactly 8 p.m., right before the final interview segment. She'd promoted it all day on social media with cryptic messages. "The truth about Texas's Golden Girl comes out tonight. You won't believe what we uncovered." I was parked in a shopping center parking lot, a few miles from the theater, watching the pageant stream on my phone with Leo sleeping in his car seat. I'd borrowed Gus's truck for the evening. He'd insisted when I called to ask. At 8 p.m., Jessica's post went live. Within minutes, I watched it spread across social media. The hashtag she'd created, #TexasTeenTrash, started trending locally, then regionally. The post was devastating. It included everything: the audio clips of Tiffany's racist remarks, videos of her mocking other contestants, screenshots of her talking about sabotaging competitors, her real personality, laid bare for the world to see. On my phone screen, I could see the pageant continuing. Tiffany was waiting backstage, looking perfect and confident in her sparkly evening gown. She had no idea what was happening. Then I saw it. People in the audience started looking at their phones. There was a ripple of movement, whispers spreading. The judges were looking at their phones too. Even the host seemed distracted. When it was Tiffany's turn, she walked out with her practiced smile. The interview question was about what quality she thought was most important in today's youth. It was a softball question, exactly what she'd prepared for. But before she could answer, someone in the audience shouted, "Hypocrite!" Another voice joined in. "We know who you really are." The crowd pulled out their phones, holding them up. Some people were booing. The energy shifted from supportive to hostile in minutes. Tiffany stumbled over her words. Her practiced composure cracked. She looked around wildly, confused. The host tried to regain control, but it was too late. The damage was done. Tiffany started crying right there on stage, black streaks of mascara running down her face, destroying the perfect image she'd worked so hard to maintain. She ran off stage. I could see my mother rushing toward her, my father's face red with anger. But there was nothing they could do. The truth was out there now, spreading faster than they could possibly control it. I turned off the stream and drove back to Oak Creek. I parked down the street from the house and waited. They came home about an hour later. I watched them get out of the car, my father slamming his door so hard I could hear it. Tiffany was still crying, and my mother had her arm around her. They looked devastated, and I felt absolutely nothing. Over the next days, I watched my plan unfold better than I'd imagined. The story went viral beyond the local pageant community. Major news outlets picked it up. Tiffany's sponsors dropped her one by one. The pageant organization stripped her of previous titles and banned her from future competitions. But the real damage went deeper. My father's business started suffering immediately. His entire client base was made up of wealthy, image-conscious families who cared deeply about reputation. They didn't want to be associated with scandal. Within a week, he'd lost 3 of his biggest clients. Within 2 weeks, half his roster had pulled out. My mother's social circle turned on her too. The women she had coffee with, the charity boards she sat on. Suddenly, they were all too busy. The invitations stopped. She went from being a respected figure in Oak Creek society to being whispered about and avoided. I started implementing the next phase. I'd been saving every penny for weeks, doing odd jobs through apps, selling things online. I had just enough for first month's rent and deposit on a tiny apartment across town. It wasn't much, just a studio with a small kitchen and a bathroom that had seen better days, but it was mine. It wasn't in anyone's basement. I packed everything Leo and I owned into garbage bags. We didn't have much. I did it in the middle of the day when everyone was out. I left a note on the kitchen counter. "Thank you for teaching me that family is about more than blood. It's about showing up when it matters. You failed that test. I won't make the same mistake with my son." Moving into that apartment was like being able to breathe for the first time in years. It was small and the neighborhood wasn't great, but it was ours. I didn't have to walk on eggshells. I didn't have to hide in a basement. I got a job at a local diner, working morning shifts so I could be home with Leo in afternoons and evenings. The pay wasn't great, but with tips and assistance programs, we could manage. It wasn't easy, but it was honest work, and nobody treated me like I was worthless. Gus became a regular at the diner. He'd come in for breakfast a few times a week, always sat in my section, left generous tips, and asked about Leo. Slowly, carefully, I started to believe that good people existed in the world. He introduced me to his daughter, who helped me find better childcare. He taught me basic car maintenance. He became the grandfather Leo never had. Meanwhile, I watched from a distance as my family's world continued crumbling. Through mutual acquaintances and social media, I kept track. Tiffany couldn't find work. Every job application was met with rejection once employers Googled her name. She'd become infamous, the poster child for fake influencers and pageant queen scandals. My father's business was in freefall. He was hemorrhaging money, and the worst was yet to come. That beautiful house in Oak Creek? It turned out they didn't actually own it outright. It was mortgaged to the hilt, and the primary lender was a company owned by Maria's father, Eduardo Rodriguez. Eduardo was a real estate developer who'd made his fortune buying and flipping properties across Texas. He was a businessman first, but also a father who loved his daughter fiercely. When he learned what Tiffany had done to Maria, both past sabotage and racist remarks, he was furious. And when my father came to him trying to renegotiate the mortgage due to business troubles, Eduardo saw an opportunity. He went through the mortgage paperwork with a fine-toothed comb and found what he was looking for. There was a clause about the property maintaining its value and the borrower maintaining good standing in the community. It was vague enough that it had never been enforced before. Eduardo decided to enforce it now. He called in the loan. All of it. Immediately. My father didn't have that kind of liquid cash. He'd tied everything up in investments and his failing business. He tried to refinance with other lenders, but the scandal had made him toxic. No bank wanted to touch him. He had 30 days to come up with the money or face foreclosure. 4 months after that night in the hospital, I drove through Oak Creek in Gus's borrowed truck. It was a Saturday afternoon, warm and sunny. Leo was in his car seat, chattering away. I wasn't planning to drive by my parents' house, but I saw the U-Haul truck in the driveway. I slowed down, then pulled over to the curb a few houses away. They were loading their belongings into the truck. Not the expensive furniture or artwork or designer clothes, those had been sold off weeks ago. They were loading the last remnants into a beat-up rental truck. Cardboard boxes labeled with black marker, plastic storage bins, garbage bags. My father looked like he'd aged 10 years in 4 months. His face was haggard, shoulders slumped. He wore jeans and a t-shirt, clothes I'd never seen him in before. He'd always been a suit and tie man. The informal clothes looked wrong on him, like a costume he didn't know how to wear. My mother stood on the front lawn, looking diminished somehow. Her designer clothes hung loose on her frame. She'd lost weight, but not in the carefully maintained way she used to manage. This was the weight loss of stress and sleepless nights. And then there was Tiffany, sitting on the curb, head in her hands. She wasn't crying, which somehow made it worse. She just looked empty. The light that had always surrounded her, that confidence and self-assurance, was completely gone. I sat in the truck for a long moment, just watching. I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated. But what I actually felt was much more complex. There was satisfaction, a sense of justice served, but also a kind of sadness for what could have been if they'd been different people. If they'd loved me, if they'd cared about Leo. Then Carol saw me. She froze, recognition flashing across her face. She dropped the box she was holding and started walking toward my truck, pace increasing until she was almost running. I got out slowly. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. That fear had died months ago. She reached me and grabbed my arms, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "You?" she hissed, face twisted with rage and pain. "You did this to us. You destroyed everything. You're a snake. A vindictive, horrible snake." I didn't pull away. I just looked at her calmly. "No, Mom. I didn't destroy you. I just opened a door and let the world see who you really are. That's all." My father had noticed and was walking over. Richard looked at me with such hatred that a younger version of myself would have crumbled. "But I wasn't that girl anymore. Do you remember what you said to me that night?" I asked, voice steady and clear. "When Leo was dying in my arms? You said it wasn't your problem. You said I needed to handle my own issues." He didn't respond, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. "You were right," I continued. "It wasn't your problem. And now, your problems aren't mine. Fair is fair." I walked past them toward where Tiffany was sitting. She looked up at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in her eyes. She was afraid of me, and that realization was almost intoxicating. I crouched down to her eye level. "How's your stage presence today, Tiffany?" I asked quietly. "You're not looking your best. Maybe you should have gotten more sleep." "Oh wait, I forgot. You did sleep. That night. While your nephew almost died." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? I stood up and walked back to the truck. I could feel them all staring. Before I got in, I turned around one last time. "That night, you closed the door in the face of a dying child," I said, loud enough for all of them to hear clearly. "Today, the world closed its door on you. And I want you to know exactly what it feels like to stand on the outside in the cold, desperate and alone, with nowhere to go and no one who cares. Remember this feeling. Because this is what you did to me and my son." I got into the truck and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I could see them standing there, 3 figures growing smaller as I drove away. They looked lost, standing in front of that empty house. They looked like strangers, and I realized that's exactly what they were to me now. Life got steadily better. After 6 months at the diner, I got promoted to shift manager. The pay increase was enough to move us into a slightly bigger apartment, with an actual bedroom for Leo. I started taking online classes through community college, working toward a degree in business administration. It was slow going, just 1 or 2 classes per semester, but I was making progress. Leo thrived. He was a bright, happy kid who made friends easily. He loved dinosaurs and building blocks and stories about space. He had no idea his life had started in a basement, that his family had rejected him. To him, our small apartment was a castle, and I was his superhero. Gus became a fixture in our lives. He taught Leo how to fish and took us to his church on Sundays, a small community congregation where people actually knew each other's names and cared. I found comfort in the routine and community. These people didn't care about social status or designer clothes. They cared about showing up for each other. Through the church, I met Susan, a woman who ran a small bookkeeping business from her home. She was looking for someone to train as an assistant. It paid better than the diner and had normal business hours, which meant evenings with Leo. I jumped at it. Susan became a mentor. She taught me not just about bookkeeping, but about running a business, dealing with clients, managing time and resources. She told me I had a good head for numbers and organization, that I could build a real career. No one had ever said anything like that to me before. A year after I left, Maria invited me to her pageant. She'd continued competing after Tiffany's downfall. She won the Texas teen title that year. The crown that should have been Tiffany's. I went to watch her, bringing Leo with me. Sitting in that audience, watching Maria accept her crown with grace and genuine humility, I felt closure. This was justice, not just the destructive kind that had brought my family down, but the constructive kind that lifted good people up. 2 years after I left, I completed my associate degree in business administration. It was a small ceremony, nothing fancy, but Gus came and Susan came and Maria sent flowers. Leo was there too, sitting in his little suit. When they called my name, I heard Leo yelling, "That's my mama!" And it was the proudest moment of my life. Susan offered me a partnership in her bookkeeping business shortly after. She was getting older and wanted to start stepping back. We restructured the business as a partnership, and suddenly, I wasn't just an employee. I was a business owner. The money got better, slowly but steadily. We moved into a small house in a decent neighborhood with a yard where Leo could play and a second bedroom I turned into a home office. I bought a used car. I had built a life from nothing, and every piece of it was earned. I started seeing someone, a man named Marcus, who worked as a teacher at Leo's elementary school. He was kind and patient and loved children. He didn't care about my past or family drama. He cared about who I was now. 3 years after I left, Marcus and I got married in a small ceremony at the church with Gus officiating. Leo was our ring bearer, taking his job seriously. It was simple and beautiful and exactly what I wanted. No expensive venue, no designer dress, no pretense, just people who loved us. My parents were not invited. They didn't even know about it. Their absence didn't leave a hole in the day. If anything, their not being there made it better. There was no tension, no worry, just joy. 5 years after I left, Susan retired and I bought out her share of the business. I renamed it Evelyn Martinez Accounting Services and hired 2 employees. I was genuinely successful now, not in the flashy way my parents had valued, but in a real, sustainable way. I paid my bills on time, saved for Leo's college fund, took modest vacations. I had built something stable and good. One evening, I was putting Leo to bed when he asked about my parents. He was 8 years old now, old enough to notice other kids had grandparents. "Mama," he said, "how come I don't have a grandma and grandpa like the other kids?" I'd known this question would come. "You do have biological grandparents," I said carefully, "but they're not part of our lives. Sometimes people make choices that mean they can't be in our family anymore." "Did they do something bad?" "They made choices that hurt us," I said, "and my job as your mom is to keep you safe and happy, so I decided we needed to stay away from them." "But you have Gus and Susan," he pointed out. "They're like grandparents." "They are," I agreed. "Family isn't just about blood, sweetheart. Family is about who loves you and shows up for you and treats you well. Gus and Susan do that. Your biological grandparents didn't." He thought about that. "Okay," he said finally. "I like the family we have." "Me too, baby, me too." I kissed his forehead, and I felt peace wash over me. I had protected him. I had broken the cycle. He would grow up knowing what healthy love looked like. That, more than any revenge, was my victory. Today, 12 years after that night in the hospital, I'm sitting in my office looking at a photo of my family. Marcus and me, Leo, who's now 15 and towers over me, and Emma, who's 4 and full of personality. We're at the beach, all sandy and sunburned and grinning. It's not a professional photo. It's not perfectly staged, but it's real. My business is thriving. I employ 7 people and we're doing well enough that I've started a scholarship fund for young women leaving difficult family situations. It's small, just a few $1,000s a year, but it's making a difference. I still volunteer at the women's shelter. I still get calls from women who heard my story, asking for advice or needing someone to tell them it gets better. I always take those calls. I always tell them the truth. It's hard, it hurts, but you can survive it. More than survive, you can thrive. I haven't seen or spoken to my parents or Tiffany in years. I heard recently my father had retired and they'd moved to a smaller town somewhere. I hope they found some peace. I genuinely do. Not for their sake, but for mine. Carrying anger and resentment is exhausting, and I let go of that burden long ago. But letting go of anger doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't matter. That night changed me fundamentally. It showed me what I was capable of surviving, what I was capable of building. It taught me that sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you need, and that's okay. You can create your own family from the people who show up and prove themselves worthy. If I could go back and talk to that girl in the basement, still trying to earn her family's love, I would tell her to stop trying. I would tell her she's already enough, exactly as she is. I would tell her that the love she's seeking has to come from within first, and then from people who have earned the right to give it to her. I would tell her that blood doesn't make family, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. But I can't go back. None of us can. We can only move forward, taking the lessons we've learned and using them to build better futures. And that's what I've done. That's what I continue to do every day. 6 years after I left, I was approached by a woman at a networking event for small business owners. She introduced herself as Jennifer, and she said she'd heard my story from a mutual acquaintance. Not the details, just that I'd started my business from nothing and built it into something successful. I'm in a bad situation, she told me quietly, glancing around. My family is toxic. They treat me terribly. But I don't know how to leave. I'm scared. I looked at her, at the fear and desperation in her eyes, and I saw myself from years ago. It's terrifying. I told her honestly. Leaving is one of the hardest things you'll ever do. But staying is harder. Staying costs you pieces of yourself until there's nothing left. But how did you do it? She asked. How did you find the courage? I didn't start with courage, I said. I started with necessity. My son needed me to be strong, so I had to figure it out. But here's what I learned. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite the fear, and you don't need a perfect plan. You just need to take the first step. I gave her my business card and told her to call me if she needed resources or just someone to talk to who would understand. Over the next months, I helped her create an exit plan, connected her with resources, and supported her through leaving her toxic family situation. Helping Jennifer made me realize something important. My experience, as painful as it had been, had value. I could use what I'd learned to help other people. So I started volunteering with a local organization that supported women leaving difficult family situations. I taught financial literacy classes and helped women create business plans and figure out how to support themselves independently. It became a passion, this work of helping people reclaim their lives. I had been helped by strangers like Gus and Susan and Maria when I needed it most, and now I could pay that forward. 7 years after I left, I ran into my mother at a grocery store. It was completely unexpected. I was in the cereal aisle, comparing prices, when I looked up and there she was. She'd aged significantly. Her hair was completely gray, with deep lines around her eyes and mouth. She wore clothes from a discount store and looked tired. We both froze. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then Leo came around the corner, pushing the cart. He was 9 years old, tall for his age, with my dark hair and his father's eyes. My mother looked at him with such naked longing that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Evelyn, she said, voice barely a whisper. Hello, Carol, I replied, deliberately using her first name. Is that Leo? She asked, eyes not leaving him. It is. He's so big. He's beautiful. He is, I agreed. Leo, go grab the orange juice, please. He nodded and headed off, oblivious to the tension. When he was out of earshot, my mother spoke again. I think about you all the time, she said. Both of you. I made terrible mistakes. I was a bad mother. Yes, you were, I said simply. There was no point in sugarcoating it. Is there any chance you could forgive me? That we could have some kind of relationship? I looked at her, really looked at her. She looked broken and sad and lonely. Part of me wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, to bridge the gap. But a bigger part, the part that had learned to protect myself and my son, knew better. I have forgiven you, I said finally. For my own peace of mind, I've let go of the anger. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. What you did wasn't just one bad night, Carol. It was years of choices. You chose appearances over substance. You chose one child over another. You taught me that love was conditional, and I spent years trying to earn something you were never going to give. I was wrong, she said, tears running down her face. I know that. Can't we start over? No, I said gently but firmly. We can't. Because you're not asking for the right reasons. You're not asking because you've changed or because you understand what you did wrong. You're asking because you're lonely and you've lost everything else. I'm not a consolation prize, and neither is my son. Please, she whispered. I hope you find peace, I said. I really do. But you're not going to find it through me. Take care of yourself, Carol. I called Leo back and we continued our shopping. My mother stood in the aisle, crying quietly, but I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. Looking back meant risking the life I'd built, the peace I'd found, the health and happiness of my son. Marcus asked me that night if I was okay after running into her. I thought about it carefully before answering. I am, I said. I really am. Seeing her didn't hurt the way I thought it would. I just felt distant from it all, like watching a sad movie about someone else's life. Do you ever regret what you did? He asked. The revenge, I mean. Sometimes, I admitted. Sometimes I wonder if I went too far, if destroying them was necessary or if it was just cruelty masquerading as justice. But then I remember that night, standing in that hallway with Leo dying in my arms, and I remember the door slamming, and I think they made their choices. I just made sure the world saw those choices clearly. You think you'd do it differently if you could go back? I think I'd leave sooner, I said. I'd stop trying to earn their love years earlier. But the rest of it? The exposing of Tiffany? The consequences? I don't know. Maybe I would. Maybe I wouldn't. It doesn't matter now. What matters is that we're here, and we're okay, and we built something good. 8 years after I left, Leo started middle school. He was confident and kind, popular with his peers but not arrogant about it. He played soccer and did well in school and talked about wanting to be a veterinarian when he grew up. He had friends whose houses he visited and who visited ours. He had a normal, healthy childhood, the kind I'd never had. Marcus and I had a daughter, Emma, who Leo adored. Watching him with his baby sister, seeing how gentle and patient he was, I knew I'd done something right. I'd broken the cycle. My children would grow up knowing they were loved unconditionally, that their worth wasn't tied to achievements or appearances, that family meant showing up and being present and choosing each other every day. I heard through the grapevine that Tiffany had moved out of state, trying to reinvent herself somewhere people didn't know her history. My father had taken a job with a large corporation, a mid-level position that paid the bills but was far cry from running his own firm. My mother still worked at the dental office. They'd stayed together. Whether out of love or just inertia, I didn't know. I didn't wish them harm anymore. I didn't wish them anything at all. They were strangers who happened to share my DNA, nothing more. They had no power over me, no ability to hurt me. I'd taken that power back, and I guarded it carefully. On Leo's 10th birthday, we threw a party in our backyard. It wasn't fancy, just pizza and a sheet cake and games on the lawn. But it was full of people who loved him. His friends from school and soccer, Marcus's family who'd welcomed us with open arms, Gus and Susan, Maria who still kept in touch. It was loud and chaotic and perfect. As I watched Leo blow out his candles, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about him, I thought about that night 10 years ago. The night that had changed everything. The night I'd learned the hardest lesson of my life about who I could count on and who I couldn't. If someone had told me then, standing barefoot on that highway with my dying son in my arms, that 10 years later I would have all of this, I wouldn't have believed them. I couldn't have imagined getting from that moment to this one. The distance seemed impossible to cross, but I had crossed it, one step at a time, one day at a time, one small decision at a time. I'd chosen to fight instead of surrender. I'd chosen to build instead of just destroy. I'd chosen to believe that I deserved better, and then I'd gone out and created better. 9 years after I left, I was asked to speak at a local women's shelter about my experience leaving a toxic family situation and building a successful business. I was nervous about sharing my story publicly, but I felt like I owed it to other women who were where I had been. I told them about the basement room and the closed door and the desperate ride to the hospital. I told them about the rage that had fueled my revenge and the way it had both helped and hurt me. I told them about the long, slow process of building a new life, of learning to value myself, of discovering that I was capable of so much more than I'd been allowed to believe. But most importantly, I told them about hope. I told them that no matter how trapped they felt, there was a way forward. It wouldn't be easy. It would be terrifying and painful and hard. But it was possible. And on the other side of that fear and pain was a life worth living. After the talk, several women came up to me. Some just wanted to shake my hand and say thank you. Others wanted advice on their specific situations. One woman, probably in her early 20s, was crying as she spoke to me. "I don't know if I can do it," she said. "I'm so scared." I put my hand on her shoulder. "You can do it. I know because I did it, and I was scared too. I was terrified. But being scared doesn't mean being unable. It just means you're facing something hard, and you're stronger than you know." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "How did you know it was the right decision?" "I didn't," I admitted. "I didn't know if it was right. I just knew staying was killing me. Sometimes you don't need to know if something is the right choice. You just need to know that the current situation is untenable, and then you leap and figure out the rest on the way down." 10 years after I left, I sat down with Leo, who was now 13, and told him the full story. Not the sanitized version I'd given him when he was younger, but the truth. About my family, about that night, about what I'd done in the aftermath. He listened quietly, face serious. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Are you angry at me?" I asked, suddenly nervous. "For what I did to them? For cutting them out of your life?" He looked at me with those wise eyes, so much older than his years. "No," he said. "I'm proud of you. You protected me. You protected us. That's what parents are supposed to do." "I sometimes wonder if I went too far with the revenge," I confessed. "If destroying them was necessary or if it was just me being vindictive." "Maybe it was both," Leo said with a shrug. "Maybe you were vindictive and you were protecting yourself at the same time. People aren't just one thing." "But Mom, they made their own choices. You didn't make Tiffany say racist things. You didn't make them close the door that night. You just showed people who they really were." Out of the mouths of babes, I thought. Or in this case, out of the mouth of my incredibly perceptive teenager. "You know what I remember most from when I was really little?" Leo said. "I remember feeling safe. Even when we were in that tiny apartment and you were working all the time, I always felt safe with you. That's what matters." I hugged him then, this boy who was rapidly becoming a young man, and I felt like maybe I'd done okay. Maybe all the mistakes and the struggles and the hard choices had added up to something good. Maybe I'd given him what I never had: unconditional love and a foundation of security to build his life on. The door that closed in my face that night was the best thing that ever happened to me, though it took me years to see it that way. It forced me to stop waiting for permission to live my life. It forced me to stop seeking validation from people who were never going to give it. It forced me to become the person I needed to be, not just for my son, but for myself. So yes, they closed the door. They slammed it in the face of a dying child and his desperate mother. But in doing so, they freed me. They freed me to build a life that didn't include them, didn't require their approval, didn't depend on their presence. They freed me to discover who I really was and what I was really capable of. And when I look at my life now, at my family and my business and my home and my peace of mind, I realize that I won. Not because they lost, though they did, but because I built something real and good and lasting. Because I chose love over hate, growth over stagnation, courage over fear. The night the door closed was the night my real life began, and I wouldn't change a single thing.